Chapter 16. The Zulu War, 1879. Mud Adkipavis, Superior Firepower versus Traditional Warfare. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 was a brief but pivotal conflict that highlighted the stark contrast between modern military technologies and traditional warfare. This clash between the British Empire, armed with cutting-edge rifles, artillery and military tactics, and the Zulu Kingdom, relying on traditional weapons and methods, underscored the growing gap in technological capability between European imperial powers and indigenous societies. The war is most famous for its battles at Isandlwana and Rooker's Drift, where Zulu warriors achieved a stunning victory at one, but were overwhelmed by British firepower at the other. At its core, the Zulu War was not just a military conflict, but a representation of how colonial powers used superior technology to subjugate and control indigenous peoples. The British, equipped with the most advanced military technology of the time, particularly breechhead reformating rifles, artillery and Gatling guns, faced off against a society whose military success had historically been based on physical prowess, coordination and hand-to-hand combat. The result was a stark and brutal demonstration of how modern firepower could overcome even the most disciplined and determined traditional armies. In this chapter, we will explore the causes and key events of the Zulu War, focusing on the technological disparities between the British and Zulu forces. We will examine how British firearms, artillery, and tactics ultimately determined the outcome of the war, and how this conflict reflected the broader theme of technological dominance and the expansion of European imperialism. The Zulu Kingdom, a military power based on tradition. Before the war, the Zulu Kingdom was one of the most formidable military forces in southern Africa. Founded by the legendary leader Shaka Zulu in the early 19th century, the Zulu state had developed a highly effective military system based on discipline, organization, and close-quarters combat. Shaka revolutionized warfare in the region, transforming the Zulu army into a cohesive fighting force that relied on the Ikwa, a short stabbing spear, and shield formations to overwhelm opponents in battle. His military tactics, known as the Horns of the Buffalo formation, involved surrounding and crushing the enemy in a pincer movement, with one central force engaging the enemy head-on while flanking units attacked from the sides. Zulu warriors were trained from a young age in the arts of war and had a deep cultural attachment to their traditional fighting methods. Although they occasionally used firearms, mostly outdated muskets or rifles captured from other African groups or European traders, their primary weapons remained the assegai, a shorter stabbing spear, lingatong and shield. The Zulu army's success had always been based on its speed, mobility, and overwhelming force in close combat, which had allowed it to dominate local rivals for decades. By the late 1870s, the Zulu Kingdom, under King Cetshwayo, continued to be a major regional power, but it faced increasing pressure from European colonial expansion, particularly from the British, who sought to consolidate control over southern Africa. The British Empire, expansion, and superior technology. The British Empire in southern Africa was growing rapidly by the 1870s, with ambitions to control all of the region's valuable resources and unify its colonies and territories. The Cape Colony under British rule and the independent Boer republics settled by Dutch-descended Afrikaners both eyed the Zulu Kingdom as an obstacle to their expansion. The discovery of diamonds in South Africa in the late 1860s further intensified British interest in controlling the region, particularly because the Zulu Kingdom lay between British-controlled territories in Natal and the Boer republics. By 1878, the British were looking for a pretext to invade Zululand. Sir Bartle Frere, the British High Commissioner for Southern Africa, saw the Zulu military as a potential threat to British interests, especially given the Zulu Kingdom's well-known military prowess. In December 1878, the British issued an ultimatum to King Cetshwayo, demanding that he disband his army and accept British authority. Setshwayo unsurprisingly refused, as the terms would have effectively destroyed the sovereignty of his kingdom. The British army that invaded Zululand in early 1879 was a highly modernized force. Equipped with Martini-Henry breech-lungen rifles, artillery, and the newly developed Gatling gun, an early form of machine gun, the British soldiers represented the cutting edge of military technology in the 19th century. The Martini-Henry rifle in particular was a significant advancement over previous weapons, allowing soldiers to fire multiple rounds per minute with improved accuracy and range compared to older muzzle-loading firearms. The Battle of Isandlwana, a stunning Zulu victory. On January 22, 1879, the British suffered one of the most shocking defeats in their imperial history at the Battle of Isandlwana. A British force of around 1,800 soldiers, including regular infantry and native auxiliaries, was encamped at Isandlwana near the Zulu border. Confident in their technological superiority and underestimating the Zulu army, the British had failed to properly fortify their position or scout the surrounding area. The Zulu forces, numbering over 200 warriors, used their traditional tactics to full effect. Under the command of Zulu generals like Ntshingwayo ka Mahole and Mavumengwana ka Endelela, the Zulu army deployed their horns of the buffalo formation, enveloping the British camp and launching a ferocious assault. Despite facing heavy fire from British rifles and artillery, the Zulu warriors closed the distance and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The British, caught off guard and overwhelmed by the sheer number of Zulu warriors, were unable to reload their rifles fast enough to stem the Zulu advance. Their modern weapons were rendered ineffective in the chaotic melee that followed, as Zulu spears and shields proved deadly in close quarters. By the end of the day, the Zulu army had annihilated the British force, killing over 1,300 soldiers. The defeat at Isandlwana was a humiliating blow to British imperial pride, and demonstrated that even a technologically superior army could be defeated by disciplined traditional forces under the right circumstances. Rorke's Drift, the triumph of firepower. Although the British were devastated by their defeat at Isandlwana, they quickly regained the upper hand in the war thanks in large part to their superior firepower. Later that same day, the British garrison at Rorke's Drift, a small mission station, faced its own Zulu assault. Unlike the disaster at Isandlwana, the Battle of Rorke's Drift became a symbol of British resilience and the effectiveness of modern technology in defensive warfare. A small British force of around 150 men, led by Lieutenant John Chard and Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, defended Rorke's Drift against approximately 4,000 Zulu warriors. The British soldiers were armed with Martini-Henry rifles, which allowed them to fire rapidly and accurately at the approaching Zulu forces. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the British soldiers held off repeated Zulu attacks over the course of 2 days, firing from behind makeshift barricades. The firepower of the Martini-Henry rifles proved decisive. The Zulus, equipped with spears and shields, were unable to get close enough to the British position to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Each time the Zulus attempted to storm the barricades, they were cut down by volleys of rifle fire. The defense of Rorke's Drift became legendary in British military history, with 11 soldiers awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honour, for their bravery during the battle. The victory at Rorke's Drift, though far less strategically significant than the defeat at Isandlwana, reinforced the idea that British technological superiority would ultimately prevail in the conflict. The battle highlighted the stark contrast between modern firearms and traditional weapons, with the Zulu warriors' bravery and discipline proving no match for the devastating power of breech-loading rifles in a defensive position. The role of firearms and artillery in British victory. The early phases of the Anglo-Zulu War revealed the vulnerabilities of both sides. The British, despite their advanced weaponry, suffered a humiliating defeat due to their lack of preparation and overconfidence. However, as the war progressed, the technological advantages of the British became more apparent, particularly in their use of artillery and rapid-fire weapons. The British quickly regrouped after Isandlwana, reinforcing their troops and bringing more artillery and Gatling guns to the front. Gatling guns, capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute, were particularly effective against large formations of Zulu warriors. At the Battle of Ulundi on July 4, 1879, the final major engagement of the war, British forces under Lord Chelmsford decisively defeated the Zulu army by using a combination of artillery and infantry firepower. The Zulu warriors advancing across open ground were cut down by concentrated volleys from British rifles and artillery bombardments. The cannon and howitzers used by the British allowed them to destroy Zulu fortifications and scatter large groups of warriors before they could get close enough to engage in close combat. The British artillery's range and destructive power were unmatched by anything the Zulu forces could muster. At Ulundi, the Zulu military, once feared for its discipline and ferocity, was effectively neutralized by the overwhelming firepower of British cannons and Gatling guns. By the end of the war, the Zulu kingdom had been defeated, its military power broken, and King Cetshwayo captured and exiled. The war demonstrated yet again that traditional armies were vulnerable to European imperial forces equipped with modern firearms and artillery. The defeat of the Zulus allowed the British to further consolidate their control over southern Africa and opened the door to future colonial conquests in the region. The broader implications of the Zulu War. The Anglo-Zulu War was one of many conflicts during the Scramble for Africa, a period of intense European colonization and conquest on the continent. The technological disparities between European powers and indigenous African states were on full display during these conflicts, as superior firepower, industrialized economies, and modern logistics systems allowed European nations to conquer vast territories with relatively small forces. Despite their complexity and frequented them, the scramble for vast territory was relatively small forces. For the British, the Zulu War reinforced the belief in their imperial destiny and technological superiority. It became a point of pride that a small, well-affected army could defeat a larger traditional fighting force, a narrative that would be repeated throughout the later stages of British imperial expansion. The war also showed how critical railways, telegraphs, and modern weaponry were in projecting British power across vast distances, a theme explored in previous chapters of this book. However, the war also raised moral and ethical questions about the use of advanced technology in warfare, particularly when wielded against less technologically advanced societies. The bravery and discipline of the Zulu warriors earned the respect of even their British enemies, but the war demonstrated the tragic reality of military technology's impact on traditional societies. The destruction of the Zulu kingdom was not only a military defeat, but also a cultural and political loss, as a once powerful African state was absorbed into the expanding British Empire. Conclusion. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 starkly illustrated the growing divide between modern and traditional military technologies. The British, armed with breech-loaded rifles, artillery and machine guns, ultimately triumphed over the Zulu kingdom, whose warriors, despite their discipline and courage, were unable to overcome the firepower and organizational advantages of the British Army. The war was a microcosm of the broader trends of European imperialism in the late 19th century, in which technological superiority allowed European powers to conquer and dominate indigenous peoples around the world. The story of the Zulu War serves as a powerful reminder of how technology, particularly in the context of warfare, can create profound inequalities between societies. The British victory was not merely a matter of strategy or bravery, but was largely determined by their access to superior weapons